Crystal Waters, It Began in Europe, Book 1 in the Crystal Waters series by Diana Rozevskis. Prologue. My name is Diana. I am a mermaid, and that is all I will say on the matter, for now. Chapter 1. The Explosion. The sunlight bathed the landscape in a gentle morning glow, casting a warm embrace across the smooth river rocks. A soft breeze whispered through the trees, marking the onset of a balmy summer morning. Two sisters sitting cross-legged on one of the large stepping stones in the river were not moving an inch. They peered into the calm waters and waited. Emma scooped up a little net from the water with deft speed and held it up to show her little sister. A small fish flipped inside the net. Emma plopped it into Grace's bucket, which nestled together at the bottom with two other fish. Grace, only 4 years old, bounced excitedly, causing water to slop out of the bucket. "Careful! You'll hurt the fish," said Emma. "It's time to put them back in the river now." Grace started to protest, but Emma was a clever 9-year-old. "Do you know what? I can smell pancakes. I bet Sheila's making them for breakfast." Grace stuck her nose in the air, sniffed and smiled. That did the trick. Soon she was helping return the fish to the water. They both watched as the fish darted away to the safety of the rocks. Of course, Emma could not smell pancakes from the river. Gran's house, where they stayed for the summer holidays, was half a mile away. The house, also known as Foyersby Hall, was enormous, and the grounds surrounding it were vast. Once a large guest house, it was always buzzing with people, but it was now quiet. No one stayed there. The business had folded years ago, before Emma was born and after Grandad died. That was when Gran lost all heart in it and did not want to continue without her beloved Bill. The girls gathered their belongings and headed back to Foyersby Hall through the woods. Emma heard a bird squawking in the trees above them. With his unruly black hair, Robert leapt from a branch above and landed on the path before them. Although he and Emma were the same age, she found him irritating. "What's up?" he drawled in his usual annoying tone. Emma walked straight past him as if he wasn't there, and Grace stuck out her tongue. "Not talking, then?" grumbled Robert. Emma was not usually this rude to people, but Robert tested her patience. She thought of Sheila, the cook, and how lovely and polite she was. He did not have his mum's manners, that's for sure. "Suit yourselves," he said as he watched them walk away. "And, by the way, it's not the jeans that make your bum look big, you know?" He shouted after them and kicked a tree root. Emma looked back over her shoulder. "Excuse me while I roll my eyes." And with that, she swung on her heels and strode off, pulling her t-shirt over her backside as she went. Grace soon caught up with her. They chatted about the day before when they had found frog spawn in the little pond. Emma remembered how they had rushed inside to tell their dad what they had seen. Dad, as always, made time for the girls and threw aside the newspaper he had been reading. Grace launched herself onto his lap. Winded, he let out a loud oomph. But then he smiled at them both. "So, what is it today, then? What miraculous discovery have you found?" he asked with a grin. The girls told him how they had been playing at the pond with the boat Grace had got for her birthday last month. It floated beautifully until it caught up in a large lily pad right in the centre of the pond. They enticed the boat out with a long stick, only to discover the plant had ensnared itself to the boat. When they untangled them, they found the frog spawn attached underneath the leaf. Dad, of course, knew all about them and had explained how they grew into frogs. Emma remembered how Grace couldn't understand why it wasn't a frog to begin with. But Dad had said what he always did in these situations. It's the beauty of Mother Nature and how things evolve. Dad, said Grace, if a turtle doesn't have a shell, does that make him homeless or in the nuddy? Dad laughed at his brainy little daughter and hugged them both tightly. That night, Mum took them both to bed and tucked them in. She read the girls' bedtime stories and said they could see the frog spawn in the morning. Of course, the frog spawn was long forgotten in the morning, and they had gone to the river. Now, heading back to the house, they were starving and their stomachs growled in protest. The girls giggled as they shared a joke. Robert sighed as he followed a little distance behind. He tried to provoke a response and tutted, but the girls sniggered and walked on. "Let's run!" Emma shouted to Grace, and with the wind rushing through their hair, they raced around the house and to the back kitchen door. But they stopped. The door was shut. It was never closed on a warm summer's day like today. Emma lifted the latch and opened the door. The usual waft of delicious food was absent, and Sheila the cook was nowhere to be seen. The girls sensed immediately something was wrong. And where were Mum and Dad? Dad always sat with his morning newspaper while Mum busied herself in the kitchen. "Where's Mummy?" cried Grace, tears now pooling in her eyes. Emma took hold of her little hand and pulled her close. "I'm not sure," said Emma, looking around the large kitchen, feeling quite puzzled. Surely everyone wasn't still sleeping this morning, she thought. Together, they ran through the kitchen, along the corridor to the main staircase. These stairs took them to the first floor of Emma and Grace's bedrooms. The adults occupied the second floor, so they went up another flight of stairs. First, they looked in Mum and Dad's bedroom. No one was there, and the bed looked like it had not been slept in. They went into the ensuite. It was obvious their parents had not used the shower that morning. No steam clouded the mirror or splashes on the shower door. But Mum and Dad always took a shower every morning. Next, they had a look in Gran's room. It was the same. Gran had not been in her room all night. Emma was beginning to feel worried. It was not like their parents to leave them. Something was wrong. Where's the grub then? Where is everybody anyway? "I'm starving," panted Robert as he rushed up behind them. His black hair had flopped over one eye and his cheeks were pink and flushed. Emma would have ignored him, but the missing adults had stunned her. "I don't know," she whispered. He too forgot their squabbles and helped them search the other rooms in the house. But like the bedrooms, they were deserted. The three of them, now back in the kitchen, looked at each other with panic. Where were they? Thought Emma. Grace started sobbing and buried her head into Emma's side. "I know where we haven't looked!" Emma shouted, making the other two jump. "Olga and Herman's cottage!" Olga, Gran's housekeeper, and Herman, the gardener, lived in the cottage behind the house. Like Sheila, they had been there for years serving Gran. Olga and Herman fell in love at first sight and soon married. The children's feet hardly touched the gravel courtyard to the cottage's front door. They all smiled, for through the open cottage window they could hear Mum, Sheila, and Olga's familiar voices. Robert raised his knuckles to rap on the door, but Emma grabbed his hand to stop him. There was a strain in her mum's voice that Emma did not like. She knew when her mum was upset. Her voice would always rise a few octaves higher than usual. She turned to Grace and put her finger to her lips. Grace thought it was a game and also put her finger to her lips. But when she did it, a loud shushing noise emerged and spit sprayed down her chin. Normally Emma would have laughed, but she was concerned they'd be discovered. A slight grunting noise came from behind. Robert was now scowling at her. She knew fine well she had stood on his foot. Oh well, she thought this was unavoidable if his feet were as big as his head. She turned to him and put her finger to her lips, ignoring his protesting chunter. Emma hoped they hadn't been heard. But the three women had not stopped talking, which was a sure sign they hadn't. "I can't believe it, Olga," sobbed Mum. "Why on earth did she go? I can't understand it. My own mother, how could she do this to us?" Mum sniffed. "And to think she has not only put herself at risk, but now Will and Herman have had to go and get her back. Doesn't she know she is risking their lives? Doesn't she realise that?" Mum's voice quivered. "I'm sure Zay will be fine. It's no good getting all upset. It won't do you any good," whispered Olga in her thick Latvian accent. There was a sound of noses being blown. "We should go and see where Zay are. I'm sure Zay should be back by now. Zay have been gone all night." "Olga's right, Meg. We should go and see. I'm sure they'll bring her back safe and sound. Don't worry, love," said Sheila. Emma heard a small sigh from Mum and was sure Sheila had hugged her. Footsteps approaching from the other side of the door meant it was time for the children to hide. They just rounded the corner and out of sight before the cottage door flew open, and the three women came out. They hurried over the courtyard, through the kitchen door and down the cellar steps. Emma, Grace and Robert followed. Emma was grateful that the wooden door at the bottom of the cellar steps was open, as it always creaked loudly. Down in the cellar, the air was cool and damp. The women had gone deep into the middle chamber, where the wine was kept. It was nice and cool. The women's voices sounded distant and slightly muffled. Without a sound, the children slid inside the chamber and hid behind the huge wine racks. Through the dusty bottles, they saw the women standing in front of a large wooden door on the far side of the room. Then Olga pulled something from her apron pocket and clicked it on the engraved door. The children heard her muttering words, and something started to happen. The door began to glow, and a brilliant light suddenly blinded them. Emma, Grace and Robert shielded their eyes, but as their eyes adjusted, confusion started to set in. They could not believe what they were now looking at. Outside the door were the woods by the river where they liked to fish, but how could this be? This was at least half a mile away. And yet this was not the only strange thing. A fuzzy tunnel surrounded the scene. At the end of it was a beautiful sea, the colour of deep turquoise, and beyond was a beach with white sand. Emma and Robert looked at each other with disbelief. A beach scene in Grand Cellar? Grace, on the other hand, only saw the sand and let out a little squeak of delight. Emma cupped her hand over Grace's mouth. Suddenly, Mum let out a deafening shriek that frightened them all. "There they are! I can see them!" she shouted as she jumped up and down and clapped her hands together. Sure enough, they saw a small boat with 3 small figures in the water. As it drew closer, Emma could see 2 men and a woman. She recognised them at once. It was Dad, Herman, and Gran. The 2 men were rowing with all their might. Emma soon saw why they were in such a hurry. In the sky behind them, a huge black figure was quickly approaching. A deafening roar filled the sky, and the winged creature swooped down, blasting out fire. The crew ducked down to safety within the boat just in time. "Hurry! Hurry!" screamed Olga from the doorway. Her hands were now clasped around her cheeks. Dad, Herman and Gran had now reached the woods and ran as fast as possible towards Olga, Mum and Sheila. Herman, who had hold of Gran's waist, had flung a wet blanket over them both. Gran stumbled and tripped as she tried to keep up. The flying beast circled back around and was soon upon them again. The fireball roared towards the cellar, knocking the three women off their feet. Seconds later, Herman and Gran flung themselves through the open doorway. Without a breath, everyone started to run towards the cellar steps. Emma shouted to Herman. Soon he had scooped up all three children in his muscular frame and strode two at a time up the steps to the kitchen. Out in the courtyard they all sat down. Their smoke-blackened faces were weary and shaken. It was then Mum looked around wildly and realised someone was missing. "Where's Will?" she cried. Without warning, an explosion erupted and the kitchen door blasted from its hinges. "No!" screamed Mum as she collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Emma ran over and flung her arms around her. Hot tears streaked down both their faces. Through blurry eyes, they both stopped and stared. Herman threw the heavy kitchen door aside to reveal Grace, who was lying underneath it. She was not moving, and a small trickle of blood ran from both her ears. It was always at this point that Emma awoke from her nightmare. These recurring dreams had been happening now for 4 years, ever since the death of her dad. The dream felt eerily real, yet Emma couldn't reconcile its fantastical elements with the harsh reality of her dad's death. 13-year-old Emma knew there was no such thing as a magical doorway. Around the time of her dad's death, her memory had been a bit hazy, and so Mum had told her what happened. There had been a gas leak in Gran's cellar, and Dad was down there trying to fix it. Dad did not survive the explosion, and Grace had lost her hearing. Emma knew all this, but the confusing part was why her brain was trying to tell her a different story. A story so incredible it could not possibly be true. She put it down to the emotional trauma they had all been through. She decided there and then she would not worry about her silly dreams again,